Yasas, everyone, and welcome to our second Greek Ancestry case study webinar. Last week we talked about Asia Minor and we presented some case studies from there. Today the topic is way more specific, it's more special, and it's something that we do not discuss quite often, and it's a pity. So the topic is the Jewish communities in Greece, especially their pre-World War II history. So I'll just start with some context information, and then we'll go into some case studies. Let me thank Alexandra Kiritsi, who is our moderator today. She's replacing Carol, who was too busy today. So thank you, Alexandra. Yeah, let's get started. So, okay, you know that Jews are an ethno-religious group that can be traced back to the 13th century BC. In Greece, their earliest recorded presence goes back to the 4th century BC. That means practically Jews were in Greece 400 years before Christianity arrived. That's interesting. Now, in ancient Greece, there were Jewish communities in many areas, in Athens, in Thessaloniki, in Rhodes, and in fact, archaeologists have discovered synagogues in Athens and Delos. Delos is a little island at the center of the Cyclades. So then, during Byzantine times, the number of Jews in Greece increased, and more communities were formed all over. All these local Greek Jews are known as Romagnotes. Okay. Now, in the 14th and 15th century, Jews immigrated in our lands from Hungary and Germany, and these are known as Ashkenazi Jews. But the most important influx was after 1492 and the expulsion of Jews from Spain. So by that time, Byzantium had been defeated by the Ottomans. So all these Jews, about 20,000, they left Spain and came to the Ottoman Empire. They settled primarily in Thessaloniki, at the north of Greece in Macedonia, and this is where they thrived. Okay, they established, in fact, the first printing press of the city, and in 1519 they represented 56% of Thessaloniki. 56%. Now, a century later, around in the 1610s, their share was 68% of the city's population. Therefore, Thessaloniki was known as the Jerusalem of the Balkans, or La Madre de Israel in Spanish. And since those Jews were from Spain and they spoke a Spanish dialect, Ladino. So anyway, this continued until the 20th century. In fact, when the Greek army conquered Thessaloniki in 1912, they found 61,000 Jews in the city, or 38.9%, 38.9% of the population. They were Jewish. They by far outnumbered Christians and Muslims, by far. But the long, thriving history of the Jewish communities in Greece came to an end with World War II. Dozens of thousands of Jews were arrested and sent out to concentration camps, and they were murdered. From Thessaloniki alone, 54,000 Jews were murdered. And since World War II, in Greece, only a few communities with a few members still exist. Now, today we will try to explore this long history through records. This is not easy, and the reason is that the records, the archives of the historic Jewish communities were looted and destroyed during World War II by the Nazis. But even those records which survived most of them have not been digitized. They're not accessible online, so research is not very easy. Okay, so how did I come up with this topic? Some weeks ago, I was reading and indexing some old records from Laconia, in particular records from a village called Kaminia in Laconia, and I came across this weird surname, Moisakos. Now, the akos suffix is typical in the area of Sparta and Mani. It's like Oghlu in Asia Minor, Akis in Crete, Ivis in Pontos, Opulos, Pulos in the Peloponnese. And, so if we remove this suffix, akos, we are left with the first part, the first component of the surname, which is Mois. Moisakos, Moises, sorry, and in Greek, that means Moses. So how come someone living in Laconia in the middle of the 19th century have that surname? Is it just a coincidence? I started thinking about it, and I recalled that many names in the area of Sparta have such components with a clear Jewish essence, So Adamakos, for example, out of Adam, Davakos, out of David, Sabatakos, Sabatai, Levakos, Levi, Solomakos, Solomon. And I started searching through my database for these names, and I was finding many records. So most of these names were found in villages up on the Taigetos mountain or in smaller villages close to the mountain. In particular, I found these surnames in Anavriti, in Tripi, in Vordonia, all villages high up on the mountain. And at the same time, I recalled this passage from a book. Let me show. It's this book, Mani, Travels in the Southern Peloponnese by Patrick Leigh Fermor. So the book was published in 1958, and it is based on the experience and adventures of the author, Patrick Fermor, in Greece during World War II and later. So in the very first pages of the book, there is this scene. So Patrick, the author, is in Sparta, and he's talking with some people, some villagers there, including a priest. And they're discussing about Anavriti, this village up on the mountain. And the priest says, they're good people, but they are Jews, all right. So this rumor is repeated many times in the first chapter, apparently because it intrigued Fermor, the author. But it looks like there's some truth in it, especially if we take into account the fact that all these surnames, of Jewish origin are found in the area. So this is becoming really interesting. I delved, deeper into this, and it looks like that back in the 9th century, when monk Nikon was in Sparta, and he was trying to convert Jews to Christianity, many of them left the valley of Sparta and went up on the mountains, to rescue themselves. Now, we cannot know if the families of the area that still have these Jewish surnames descend from those Jews back in the 19th century or from later Jewish immigrants. And also, we cannot say that in the 19th century those families were still exercising, practicing their Jewish religion. Most likely they were Christians, but what is certain is that their surnames reveal traces of a long Jewish history, a Jewish background. They indicate a past Jewish tradition. And what is really interesting is that in the same area, in the same villages, same records, you find these Jewish names, but at the same time you come across Byzantine names of Byzantine nobles. And In other words, all these surnames create a mosaic of multiple historical, cultural lines and colors. It's really impressive to think that all those people with different histories, with different backgrounds, coexisted, and their coexistence was creating a new history, their history. Anyway, so let's now turn to a case study from Thessaloniki and the Hasid and Cohen families. Alexandra Kiritsi and we wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about this very topic, but it's really, really interesting, and I suggest you go on the website and check it out. It's really an impressive story. Anyway, so regarding Thessaloniki, we are lucky because there are many records for the area, and they're becoming available and accessible now. In the summer, we released a 1915 voter list from Thessaloniki, 35,000 names or something like that. And on October 15th, we released a city directory from 1934. And another directory will be coming up in the next weeks. And in addition to these, back in the 1970s and the 1980s, Family Search, it digitized the civil vital records of the municipality of Thessaloniki, the Lixiarchio records, the civil, the registry office, okay? And these are very, very interesting. They're a valuable source. So they include births, marriages, and deaths from 1914 to 1940. So you get lots of records from the pre-World War II period. Anyway, so Isaac Hasid, he was a lawyer in Thessaloniki, and according to his death record of 1926, he was born in 1860 to Samuel and Grazie. Okay, these were the names of his parents. He was a lawyer, so we can infer that his family belonged to the upper middle class. He and his wife, Bolisa, they had at least 3 children that we know of, named Julia, Samuel, and Moses Hasid. Samuel was born about 1890, and we found his marriage certificate from April 1916. So he married Esther Cohen, daughter of Menahem Cohen, and Samuel and Esther had four children: Isaac, Beatrice, Fina, and Michelle Menahem. And we found all their birth records, all of them. And according to these records, the family lived at the southeastern part of Thessaloniki on Botsari Street, the neighborhood of Agia Triada. So until 1917, most of the Jews of Thessaloniki, they lived either at the city center, their synagogues were there, and their businesses, and in the Agia Triada neighborhood. Now, what happened in 1917? In August, there was a terrible fire which burned down all of the old city center. 50,000 Jews were left homeless. 16 out of the city's 33 synagogues were burned down. The Grand Rabbinate destroyed, its archives burnt. But fortunately for the Hasids, the fire did not spread into the Agia Triada neighborhood. They were lucky. They were lucky that time. So Greece entered World War II on October 28, 1940. Firstly, we were attacked by the Italians, but we defeated them, and we, in fact, conquered southern Albania, northern Epirus. But on April 6, 1941, the Nazis invaded Greece. We could not resist them. 3 days later, on the 9th of April, the Nazis entered Thessaloniki. Now, after 1 month, on May 17th, the Grand Rabbi was arrested. Some weeks later, in June, they looted the archives of the Jewish community, what was left after the 1917 fire, and they shipped the records to Frankfurt, During the following year, there was not much anti-Semitic action taken by the Nazis, so the Jews they felt safe. Okay, they were relatively calm. But on July 11th, 1942, it was a Saturday, Sabbath, all the male Jews aged 18 to 45, they were concentrated at the central square of Thessaloniki, and they were publicly humiliated. The Nazis, after that, they imposed obligatory labor to the Jews, and sometime later they said, okay, you can avoid obligatory labor if you pay some fee, something like ransom. Okay, so they asked billions of drachmas from the Jewish community, which was a crazy sum for that time. So practically what they did was to confiscate the property of the community. In December, they turned the Jewish cemetery of Thessaloniki into a quarry. 300,000 tombs in that cemetery were destroyed, and some of them dated back to the 15th century, the first Jewish immigrants in Thessaloniki. In March 1943, deportations started. So if you think about it, in July, they clearly show the Nazis that they are against the Jews, that they will hunt them. Later, obligatory labor. Then they take their properties, the properties of the community. Then they destroyed the cemetery, and at the end they deport the families to concentration camps. About 54,000 Jews from Thessaloniki were murdered in these concentration camps. Samuel Hasid and his son Michel Menahem, they were in one of the first convoys, and they were murdered in Auschwitz in March 1943. How do we know that? There's a database of the Jewish Museum in Thessaloniki, and lots of information can be found in there about families, which were deported and murdered. Samuel would be around 53 years old at that time, but his son was 22. Samuel's mother and brother met the same fate. Esther Cohen, Samuel's wife, she was murdered on May 10th in Auschwitz. And, well, we wanted to find out more information about the fate of this family, what happened. So we reached out to the Auschwitz archives. So Auschwitz is in Poland, and they have formed an archive. They try to help people find information. They have an online database, but it's not very helpful. But if you email them, they will respond. They're great. So they found some information for this family. I'm going to read this. So Hasid Beatrice, daughter of Samuel, was deported to Auschwitz in a transport from the ghetto in Salonika that arrived to the camp between May 8 and May 9, 1943. In the camp, she was assigned prisoner number 44486. On August 21st, 1943, her death in the camp was noted. So, Beatrice, that girl, she arrived to the camp 1 or 2 days before her mother was killed there. She stayed in the camp for 70 days, and when she was murdered, she was 27 years old, that young. And imagine that her father, her brother, her uncle, her yaya, they had all been killed by May. And, if you think about it, what I realized was that numbers totally fail to express the tragedy. You hear 54,000 Jews. Okay, and you cannot, the number is so big that you cannot relate to it, right? You cannot imagine what it really means. But if you study a family or two, and see the victims, one by one, you really understand the tragic dimension of what happened. Now, in Athens, people were more lucky because here's what happened. When the Nazis started showing their anti-Semitic purposes, the archbishop in Athens, he protested and he sent secret orders to all Greek churches around the country to help the Jews and hide them. He was the only, he was the only religious leader in Europe who actually protested and tried to save the Jews. And the municipality, here's what they did. They issued fake IDs for Jews. So yesterday I visited the Jewish Museum of Greece in Athens, because I want to learn a bit more about this. And I saw these little ID cards, and they would give Christian names to Jews, and they would also write that they are Christian Orthodox, and that way the Germans could not trace them easily. Also, the Jewish community burned its archive, so the Germans did not have any source to find them. Okay, so this is what I wanted to bring up. Now the floor is yours for questions. Alexandra will start feeding me with your comments and questions. Okay, so were there ever records of missing people? So you mean, this is a question by Stephanie, do you mean like Greek records of people, like from the Greek police saying that someone is missing? I don't know about that. If you mean like how can someone find information about Jewish families which were deported or killed in Greece, or there's this database of the Jewish Museum of Thessaloniki. There is the database of Auschwitz. There are the death certificates of people that can be very helpful. And I think that even the Jewish communities in Athens and Thessaloniki, they might have some information about families. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Also, there is a library at the Jewish Museum of Greece in Athens. There's a very big library. I visited that yesterday. It's interesting. I hope that answers the questions. Any other questions? There is a comment here by Christy. What Jews faced in Greece and everywhere during World War II was really unimaginable. It's definitely beyond any human sense. But we should also not forget that that was the first time that there was a persecution of that scale, but it wasn't the first time there was a persecution in general. The Jews were the scapegoats, had been the scapegoats for centuries, for millennia. everywhere, even in the Byzantine Empire. They would impose special taxes on the Jews, or sometimes if bad things happened in the empire, they would blame the Jews. They were a religious group which faced huge discrimination, and that was primarily because back then religion was the number one identification of people. So this was the criterion if someone's good or bad. If he is of your religion or another. How large or strong is the Jewish community in Greece today? Today there are just a few Jewish communities in Greece, in Athens, Thessaloniki, in Corfu, in Ioannina, in Larissa, in Volos, but they are very, very small. Perhaps the community in Athens counts 1,000 members or two, definitely not more than that, I think, and the same number or even less in Thessaloniki, and in the other cities we're talking about just some dozens or hundreds of people. Many of them they survived Holocaust. So this is how there are some. Some were saved by the Greeks, others had moved elsewhere. For example, this Hasid family, one of their members migrated to the States, and he survived. Next question. How would there be death certificates if there were mass gas and mass burials? No, not death certificates in Germany. Death certificates in Greece. If someone was killed in Greece, I guess that the municipality could record that death. But I'm not talking about Auschwitz, for sure. But as noted in the record, in the Auschwitz record I mentioned before, everybody was given a prisoner number, and in Auschwitz they have part of these archives, so they know, that this guy or this woman had this number and was murdered on that day or arrived to the camp on that day. The Nazis were really strategic about what they were doing. They really wanted to exterminate Jews, and so they would keep records. They wanted to know the numbers of the people they were murdering. Some years ago, actually, I found somebody sent me a CIA document with names of people in Greece who were killed by the Nazis. It's called, that document was titled Nazi Atrocities in Greece or something like that. I could publish that. It's interesting. Of course, it definitely records by far fewer people than those who actually were killed. But yeah, still it has some names. Many of the Jewish population perished in Crete. How were they recorded? From the number ID? I'm not sure I understand this question, Christy. If you can clarify that. I mean, in Crete, for example, we have a collection, a mail register collection from Chania, and there are many Jewish names in there, in the mail registers, the Greek mail registers. So that's interesting. If you're looking for Jewish families back in Chania, in the area of Chania, you should find mail registers. If you mean something else than that, I guess the answer would fall under the answers I already gave about how they were recorded and all of that. Can you expand on the origins or meanings of many of the surnames that you just touched upon? You mean the Greek surnames like Adamakos, Solomakos? So what I said was that if you get rid of the akos suffix, what you are left with is a clearly Jewish word. Solomon, Moses, Sabbatai, Jewish names. Names which would not be used by any Christian family. They do not have a Greek history. You know what I mean? So these names, these surnames were created based on first names, Jewish first names, which obviously belong to Jewish people. You know, and it's interesting that all these surnames were preserved, and they were preserved because the families lived high up on the mountains. They had little contact with other people, you know, with other communities. So they were very isolated, remote, and they were able to keep their traditions, to preserve their name patterns. What happened around World War I to disperse the Jews in Thessaloniki? Were the Turks doing things similar to the Nazis? No. So when Greece conquered Thessaloniki, when the Greek army conquered Thessaloniki in 1912, there was a law, you know, saying that people of any religion would have the same rights. So at least officially, the Jews did not have problems under the Greek years of Thessaloniki. Now, before that, the Turks, I would say they treated the Jews about in the same way as they treated the Christians. They definitely discriminated, that's for sure. These people were obliged to pay additional taxes, but I do not think something special would concern the Jews. There was even, I think, a rabbi tax or something. What was the Jewish population in Greece before World War II? Nick asks. I'm not sure. I don't think anybody is certain about that. We know that there were what did I say, 55, 56,000, 60,000 Jews in Thessaloniki in 1912. Thessaloniki was the biggest community in the country, but I would say that if you add that to Athens, Corfu, and all the other communities, they could be more than 100,000. It was a significant population, especially if you take into account the population of Greeks, like Christians. At the same time, the Jews were a significant minority, you know. Jewish population of Crete were on a boat that was bombed by British. Karen says that. Yes, that's right. In fact, yesterday at the museum I visited, the Jewish Museum in Athens, there was a little exhibition about that event. Let me tell you about that museum. It's really interesting. It's 3 floors, 7 levels, 9,000 artifacts. They cover many aspects of Jewish life in Greece, including the Holocaust, even costumes, traditional Jewish costumes from Thessaloniki, Evia, I think, the Jewish Christian IDs I mentioned before, letters written by Greek Jews from inside Auschwitz, personal items, all sorts of things. It's a really interesting museum, really interesting. A very interesting question by Dana. She says, I'm aware that Asia Minor had a Greek Jewish population that migrated there over the centuries. Is there any data about how many Asia Minor Greek Jews migrated to the mainland of Greece in 1923 or so? this is interesting. So in 1923 there is this Greek-Turkish population exchange agreement, but that agreement it pertained only to Christians and Muslims. So no Jews would fall under that under those categories, under that plan, that exchange plan. Now, if some Jews willingly, migrated from Asia Minor to Greece, I'm not sure what sort of documents would be about that. But it's a very good question. Many of the Jews in Asia Minor spoke Greek as a native tongue. So that's interesting. A very interesting non-fiction book is A Miracle at Zakynthos, the only Greek Jewish community saved in entirety from annihilation, written by Dino Setter. That's a comment by Valerie Alexandris. Thank you for sharing this. That's interesting. There's also a book there are many books about the Jews in Thessaloniki, in Evia, in Zakynthos, in Corfu, in Patras. In fact, what happened with Patras, at some point after the war, the community was too small. They could not maintain a synagogue, so the synagogue was demolished. But all its interior and all the items and furniture, they were moved, and they were taken to the Jewish Museum here in Athens. So here in Athens, you can actually see how the synagogue of Patras looked like. And in fact, in a couple of days, I'm going to post some photos from my trip to the museum. It's really interesting. It's very interesting. Okay, so if there are no other questions, let's close this session. Well, next week we will be talking about contracts, notarial records, case studies about notarial records. It's interesting. We're still working on the fourth webinar, the topic. If you have any ideas, please let us know. It could be about migration or something. We will see. But if you have ideas, just let us know, because the point is for you to learn things, you know. Okay, so thank you very much for your attendance today. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. See you next week. New webinar, new topic. Γεια σας. Bye.